I wonder what your upbringing taught you about fixing broken relationships. In our house, I learned how to keep everything looking perfect from the outside, ignore the issue, pretend it's not happening, keep your chin up so everything looks fine, act like you've done nothing wrong. There were no raised voices, no arguments, but the underlying dishonesty and tension led ultimately to several broken relationships and much heartache. I'd no idea where to start to fix a broken relationship. What happened in your home? I wonder what you learned about fixing troubled relationships. When something goes wrong now with your partner, your neighbour, your colleague, your in-laws, your friend, what happens when there's a disconnect? Do you walk away or say too much? Do you feel shut out and withdraw or plan your revenge, compile a list of wrongs to attack them with? Maybe you get others involved and escalate things. This is week 3 of our beginner's guide to restoring broken relationships. Earlier in the series, we talked about changing our goal when our relationships break down. Not to get back at that person, but to get back to them. Even when I have an opportunity to get back at them, they deserve it. I'm going to tell everyone what they did and what they said. Instead, I'll make it my goal to get back to them, to open the door to restoring the relationship. When I choose to forgive from the heart, retribution and punishment are off the table. But in reality, reconciliation may not be possible because I'm not responsible for their response. Still, if I'm a Jesus follower, I want to have a clear conscience before God. I want to have no regrets in the way I handled it. But don't forget, this is just the beginner's guide to restoring relationships. If you're already in counselling, stick with that. And don't be afraid to ask for help if this is ringing lots of bells for you. Ask a couple of friends who aren't involved to pray for you. We're not suggesting you rekindle a relationship that's toxic or dangerous. That wouldn't be helpful. So how do we respond when a relationship is strained? We often make one of 3 excuses. The first is, I don't care anymore. I just don't care. I don't want to talk about it and I'm not calling them. We generally say this when we really care deeply about it. I don't care is often what we say about things we actually care deeply about. We feel powerless to do anything about it, so we retreat. We maybe didn't create the tension, but turning our back and pretending we don't care is unhealthy and may cause us problems in the future. The second excuse we say is, I tried. Now I'm waiting for them. I already tried. The ball's in their court. The third excuse we make is, anyway, it was not my fault. Did you hear what they did and what they said? It wasn't my fault. Well, that may be true, but it's beside the point. Working towards reconciliation always begins with you, not with them, regardless of whose fault it is. The healthiest and most mature person in the relationship, in the argument, should be the one to make the first move. 2,000 years ago, Jesus grew up in a normal family with imperfect people in a community living under great pressure. So he understands your annoying sibling, that overbearing relative, your unreasonable boss, and your uncooperative colleague. His take on this is helpful for all of us, whether you follow Jesus or not. He knows exactly what question to ask you and me that gets under our skin. He knows the state of your relationships, your circumstances, and your personality. He knows what they did and what she said. His first question for us is, why do you look at that speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, your sister-in-law, your spouse, your child, your neighbour, your boss, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Why are you so focused on what they did, on their hurtful words, and pay no attention to your part? We're quick to reply, it's not a speck. They left. They stole my idea. They ruined Christmas. They won't accept responsibility. She broke her promise. He lied. We say, there's no plank in my eye. You've got us confused. I know I'm not perfect, but they started it. My response was completely understandable in the circumstances. Jesus' follow-up question shows that he's read our minds. He knows what's going on in our lives. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? He knows. We think we're better than others, that we can help them. Really? Can we really say, allow me to fix you? You're broken, you're insecure, you're arrogant, insensitive. You need my advice. Jesus says to you and to me, who do you think you are to try and fix other people? You have some work to do on yourself first. How dare you? You hypocrite, that means an actor or a pretender. First take the plank out of your own eye. You and I are busted. He knows exactly what we've said and done and thought. And we've got our own issues to work on. So does that mean I should mind my own business and leave them alone? No, this is about reconciliation and relationships. So we start with our own issues, but it doesn't end there. Before you talk to others about fixing them and their faults, the key is to identify your share of the blame. The place to start in restoring that fractured relationship is to take your slice of the blame pie. When there's conflict, it's all about who did what when and who said what to who. At the end of the day, we all know someone is to blame, and it's never you. You're mature. It's not your fault. Only rarely do you and I admit that we're to blame, at least a little bit. So how do we do that when all we can see is their destructive behaviour? This is key. You pray this prayer. It may be the first time you've ever prayed. Heavenly Father, please show me where I was at fault. Even if it's something small, what could I have done differently? What should I have done in that situation? How could I have responded? Show me my piece of the blame pie. He will answer your prayer. Taking the plank out of my own eye means putting aside what they did, that hurtful thing that they said about me. It means acknowledging my part, seeing it from their point of view, however small my slice of the blame pie seems. I have an opportunity then to confess those faults to God, receive his forgiveness, and be at peace with my Heavenly Father. Then Jesus makes a promise. If you're humble enough, self-aware enough, sensitive enough to the still small voice that nudges you, then you will see clearly. That makes sense because that thing in your eye that's making it water and blurry, it's out now. So you can see the situation clearly. You can see how your words confused things or how your response wound them up, how you overreacted. Even if it feels like a tiny slice of the blame pie, I need to remove that first. Jesus promises, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. You'll be in a better position to help them. Recognizing your failure in the situation means there is a way back. But why is this so hard for us? Because we all have a little thread of self-righteousness. We think we know best, we justify our own behaviour, we focus on others' flaws. Self-righteousness always gets in the way. Self-awareness paves the way. Restoring that broken relationship requires self-awareness. I think I've done all I can, but if there's something else, I want to identify it. I want to own it. I'm willing to do it if it will help them. I will own my slice of the blame pie. Another guy called Paul had first-hand experience of overcoming broken relationships. He realized he had to own a big slice of the blame pie because of his past abusive behavior. He gave this advice: if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Your slice of the pie might be really thin, but as far as possible, do all you can to be at peace or make peace or live at peace with everyone. Owning my part of the blame, however small, depends on me. Reconciliation begins in the mirror. The more traumatic it was, the more it impacted your life, the harder it is to stop focusing on their huge slice of the blame pie and acknowledging your part. It means asking yourself, What could I have done better? How did I come across? I want to own my part in this. It may be the start of freedom for you and me. When God answers your prayer and you identify your small slice of the blame pie, then if it's safe and appropriate, you might need to go first. Be the first to apologise, send that email, have that coffee, write that letter, call. We'll talk more about taking that step in the next part of this series. I know what you're thinking. This message would be perfect for someone else. They really need to do this. But if you and I are not prepared to do this, then Jesus was right. We're hypocrites. When you and I face up to that broken relationship, our first decision is, I will get back to, not get back at. I will open my heart up to the hope of reconciliation. The second decision is, I will own my slice of the blame pie. If you and I do that, even with our kids, our in-laws, our friends, our partner, our colleague, if we admit that it's at least partly our fault, if we recognize our failure, then our humility will be a far more powerful tool than our self-righteousness. If you go first, your confession, your owning your slice of the pie might unlock something in that other person that they didn't know how to. They know it's their fault. They live with the guilt, but it's too painful to admit it. They've grown that hard shell and they don't know what to do. They're carrying the guilt and shame around, but they can't admit it. Your humility may give them enough emotional margin to acknowledge their slice of the pie and confess and set them free. But even if it doesn't, this is what it looks like to follow Jesus. He made the first move towards us when he came to earth as a man, though all the fault lay with us. It was our selfishness and pride that caused that rift with God. But he wants to get back to us, not at us. And he invites us to do the same for others. It starts by looking in the mirror and identifying the plank in my own eye. The more aware I am of what God has yet to do in me, the less aware I am of what he has yet to do in the people around me. This is an invitation to follow Jesus, to do something that might be key to unlocking someone else's heart. When you do this, you'll realize that what's in your eye is bigger than you thought, and what's in their eye is not quite so huge. If you and I resolve to get back to, not back at, the people we're having trouble with, the people we've stopped talking to, if we decide to own our slice of the blame pie, can you imagine what would happen? Imagine what would change in our family, our community, if everybody paused and took this seriously. Imagine our nation, our world, if we stopped finger pointing and acknowledged our part, however small, in the breakdown, in the conflict, if we were the first to apologise. For some of you, it's a small thing. It's your neighbour, that guy at work, that mum at the school gate, your mate at college who blanks you. For some of you, it's been years and years. You've been avoiding that family member. You've lost a friend. It's been emotional and complicated. Jesus showed us how to get back to, not get back at, when he was painfully let down by his friends. You can read the story in the Gospels of how his mates abandoned him and one grasped him up. Jesus had no slice of the blame pie to own. The fault was all theirs. And yet he approached them with a humble, gentle attitude. He didn't avoid his betrayer. He sat down and ate with him. There were no words of accusation. Jesus gently gave him the chance to change his mind. Later, he came to where his friends were fishing and invited them to a barbecue on the beach. He initiated the conversations. No blame, the conversations that unlocked their hearts and restored their relationship. He never accused, never demanded an apology, didn't wait for them to come to him and ask forgiveness. His desire was to do everything in his power to fix their broken relationship, to make peace, and his attitude was one of humility. We think The ball's in their court. But reconciling actually depends on us more than we think. If we want to fix our broken relationships with that same humble attitude as Jesus had, it means we have to admit we're at fault. Even in some small way, we have to own our slice of the blame pie. So as you think now of that relationship that feels broken, are you willing to own your slice of the blame pie, however small? Admitting our mistakes is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of maturity. Our Heavenly Father knows your story. He knows your tears and your frustration. May He give you the humility to acknowledge your faults, your slice of that blame pie, and receive forgiveness and peace. May your humility be the key that unlocks someone else's heart so you and I can make peace and live at peace with everyone.